The anarchists were still in virtual control of Catalonia, and the revolution was still in full swing. It was the first time that I had ever been in a town where the working class was in the saddle. Practically every building of any size had been seized by the workers and was draped with the red flags or the red and black flag of the anarchists. Every wall was scrawled with the hammer and the sickle and with the initials of the revolutionary parties. Almost every church had been gutted and its images burned. Even the bootblacks had been collectivized and their boxed paint red and black. Waiters and shop walkers looked you in the face and treated you as an equal. Servile and even ceremonial forms of speech had temporarily disappeared. Nobody said señor or don or even usted. Everyone called everyone else comrade and do, and said salud instead of buenos dias. All this was queer and moving. There was much in that I did not understand. In some ways I did not even like it, but I recognized immediately as a state of affairs worth fighting for. Good morning, I'm Pep and this is the Spanish Civil War. In this channel and for the next 3 years, we will follow the Spanish Civil War week by week with its battles and the Holocaust that it provoked. Last week, we closed the battle for Villarreal, the strategic offensive that ended up in a failure for the inexperienced Republican Army of the North, even though it will end this week, the 24th, with the nationalist forces recovering their positions at the beginning of the loyalist advance. We've also seen the beginning of the second battle for the A Coruña road, or Battle of the Fog, where we left the nationalist forces capturing Boadilla but failing to advance further due to the weather. And also the beginning of the Aceituna Campaign, with important nationalist advances that made the alarm ring for the Republic to start sending some reinforcement to the area. We'll start this week with the second battle for the A Coruña road, that will see its end this week. Having used the providential time given by the bad weather to entrench and reinforce themselves, the Republican forces managed to hold the line when the nationalists restarted their advance during the 20th and the 21st of December. By the 23rd, they will give up the positions at the north of Boadilla and will start to dig in. It has been another Republican defensive victory, but the battle, just 1 week after the end of their previous attempt to seize the A Coruña road, was the proof that the Francoists still had the initiative, and the loyalist forces in the center were just stopping the enemy blows. The battle, though brief, has been bloody. The troops of Barcelona, with the help of the weather, managed to hold the front long enough to receive reinforcement and to create a new defensive line, even though the price was high. Last week we've said that the Talman battalion attached to the 12th International Brigade was almost annihilated. But it was not the only one. The Commune de Paris battalion, attached to the 11th International Brigade, was also decimated. During this Battle of the Fog, a remarkable feat takes place. We've already talked about technological developments experimented in the Spanish Civil War, but unfortunately, those developments were aimed to kill, to destroy. This week, the 23rd, in the context of the Boadilla battle, the Canadian doctor Norman Bethune makes the first mobile blood transfusion, without the donor present. Lots of deaths in the front line were caused by the immediate blood loss after the wound was received. With these mobile blood transfusions, the wounded soldier was able to receive enough blood to remain alive until reaching the rear guard. We have to point out that similar mobile blood transfusion unit had been set up previously in Barcelona, but without the chance to prove itself yet. Bethune, and that is a curiosity that I would like to share with you, will die by blood poisoning after attending a wounded Chinese soldier during the Sino-Japanese War. Yes, blood poisoning. In the south, though, the Francoist offensive continues, and it has pierced the Republican defenses. The loyalist militias in the area near Montero are routed and forced to cross the Guadalquivir in numbers. By the 23rd, the order creating the 14th International Brigade is issued, and that same day, its first echelon departs for the south. The 24th, one of the battalions of the Brigade, the Sansnom Battalion, composed by 32 nationalities and 32 machine guns, one of the best equipped battalions, but without a map, is annihilated in a clash with the forces of the Redondo column. The survivors are caught in a pocket by the Moor cavalry with their back to the Guadalquivir. Just half of the 700 men that originally composed the battalion will make it back to their lines, but without their equipment. That same day, Villa del Rio falls into the nationalist hands. By Christmas 25th, they also take Montoro, where the Cordoba Front High Command is located. We've already talked last week about the Republican High Command starting to worry about the nationalist advance, even though they had been planning an offensive of their own and thought they could use the troops prepared for the offensive to stop the enemy. So the situation was not that desperate. By the 26th, some military reinforcements joined the 14th International Brigade in substitution of the routed Sansnom Battalion, and by the 27th they will march towards Lopera, which is undefended and will be occupied by Queipo's troops that same morning. When the internationals arrive at Lopera, they attack the village supported by the Spanish militiamen, but with no air and almost no artillery support. The result? Predictable. By the end of the day, 200 members of the brigades lay dead and 300 wounded. Among them, the British writer Ralph Fox. And the village remained in enemy hands. The fighting will carry on during the next week, with Queipo's troops trying to continue their advance and the loyalist forces unleashing their counterattack. Deaths, and more deaths, are to come, and we'll go back to them during the next week. It seems as if we forgot that this week it's Christmas, but it's not the case. The ones that seem to have forgotten that are the ones fighting the Spanish Civil War. The 26th, one day after Christmas, the Republican forces launched an attack in order to capture the city of Teruel in Aragon. We've seen back in summer how the loyalist militias from Catalunya and Valencia were stopped by the outnumbered nationalist forces, and Aragon remained split in half. Some attempts by the militias were made in order to attack Teruel, that found itself in a salient, but to no avail. This week they will try it again, and by the end of the week, the Republican forces managed to occupy the hills of Santa Barbara near the city. To know what will follow, we'll have to wait until next week. In the rear guard, this week, the struggle of power inside the Republic we've talked about last week gets bloodier. Pablo Yagüe, UGT member for the Madrid Defense Junta, will be wounded by an anarchist patrol. Largo Caballero's experiment of a government that would have members of every fighting factions seemed a good idea back in September, but authority conflict since then spread all over Spain. The state was being rebuilt with the aim of winning the war, and that for lots of people threatened the gains achieved when the state collapsed after the coup. In the context of this reconstruction of the state, the Republican government published the decree to create provincial councils. But that is not the only thing happening in the rearguard, as the 27th, around 20 nationalist planes will bomb the city of Santander. After the bombing, a saca takes place when the mob assaults the prison ship Alfonso Pérez. On the international stage, this week, 3,000 Italian black shirts that left Italy for Spain last week arrived at Cadiz. Mussolini's bed for Franco becomes more and more expensive. And since we've reached Christmas, we cannot close our episode about talking a bit about it. We've already said last week that most of the Spaniards thought that the war would be over by Christmas, like it happened with the Great War. But Christmas arrived, and the soldiers found themselves in the cold and muddy trenches. Of course, the celebrations were different for the nationalists and the Republicans, the first ones giving a lot of weight to the religious aspect. A mass, for example, was celebrated for the legionarios that found themselves at the clinic hospital, on the front line. On the Republican side, we find the population that was starting to suffer hardships linked to the lack of food. Pilar Duaigües Nebot, a Catalan teenager that was 15 when the coup took place and kept writing for the whole war, in her diary quoted that the 24th of December she had to stand for 8 hours in a queue in order to get bread. The 25th she will write, "Today, even if it's Christmas, there has been no holiday because there is war and the saints exist no more. During the morning at school as usual. By 6 p.m. my friends went to the bread queue, and that's terrible as it takes so long. I don't know when the bread situation will be sorted. There has been lots of deaths because of it." In Madrid, international red tape will do its best to provide the population of the capital with the typical sweets of the period, and the soldiers in the front receive a full meal. I know, or at least I guess, what you're expecting. And I would say that is what even myself was expecting when I arrived at December. A truce like the Christmas truce of the First World War, that would put some light in this nonsense, that could give some hope for mankind in those terrible days, that would show us that the war was fought by men in each side, men that, right or wrong, fought and died for their ideas, sometimes for others' lives, and did so far from their beloved ones. And of course, it happened. In every sector of the front that there was no active fighting, these episodes happened. The socialist José Uriza immortalized one of those that took place in the Basque Country, in the Guipúzcoa sector, and we will take it as an example because we have both his account and the account of a Carlist that found himself in the opposing trench. According to José Goñi, that Christmas morning somebody shouted, "Don't shoot!" After exchanging some words, the enemy decided to sit at the top of their defenses. Following the example of the Carlist enemy, the loyalist troops soon decided to do the same. At some point, a dense fog fell down and the Carlist and the loyalist militia could not see each other. That made both sides feel uncomfortable, and they decided to get back to the protection of their defenses. They continued to talk from behind the defenses, and as the fog dispersed and the sun set light on the scene again, a couple of Carlists jumped out from their position to the no man's land. They were soon followed by a couple of loyalist militiamen on the opposite side. You can see the three pictures that Goñi took from that episode here. The Carlist militiamen exchanged their newspapers. Goñi, who was from Pamplona and his mother still lived there, managed to write a letter to her that the Requetés promised they would deliver. Before returning to each one's positions, Goñi tried to appeal to the Carlist Catholic values that were shared with the Basque nationalists. The Carlist that took part in the truce, Salvador Leyún, said that he was not convinced at all about what was happening. He explained that both captains knew each other as they studied in the academy together, and after hours of negotiations, they agreed to come out from their positions without firing. They shared wine, and as we've said, they changed newspapers, and that's remarkable because each side had a very different conception of how the war was going on. By the end of the day, Leyún, that we've said, was not convinced at all about the truce, told to his captain, "My captain, after that what happened, would it be better to leave everything and return home, as and they?" His captain answered, "Yes, that would be the best, but we're at war." This truce, in fact, even if a beautiful episode that let us put a bit of hope in mankind, is a bitter reminder that Spain is at war. And because of the coup that took place back in July, thousands and thousands of people will keep dying, and that won't stop because Christmas. On Christmas Day, a Republican air attack will kill the father of Colonel Solans, according to him. And just the day before, the 24th, Francoist aviation will attack a civilian convoy of refugees that were fleeing from the recently captured areas near Jaén. 30 people, them children. Before ending this week with the promise of coming back to cover the Republican attack against Teruel, the Aceituna offensive and the Republican counter-offensive that has started this week, in order to stop Queipo's troops, we would like to talk about somebody. This somebody is George Orwell. We started our episode with the impression Barcelona left on him when he arrived the 26th of December to the city. Orwell left one of the best witnesses of the Spanish Civil War in his book Homage to Catalonia. As he didn't have any anti-fascist credentials, Orwell will join the poem's workers' militia. We've already said last week that the poem was starting to find some difficulties with the mainstream communists, and Orwell will play his role in this conflict in the future. But this will be in the future, when we will have also the chance to talk about his training and his experience in the front. But we could not end the week without making a reference to our starting quote and his arrival. Please don't forget to like the video and subscribe. If you enjoyed it, share it. We have to bring light to the history of Spain. If you're able to support us in our Patreon channel, as these heroes already did, or offer us a coffee, this would also be great and would help us to carry on and improve the project. Let's make this possible all together. Thanks for your attention, goodbye, and salute.